I took care of my sick mom for years. Then she left her entire will to my brother. For years, I gave her everything, not because she asked, not in the way one might expect, but because there was never any alternative. It wasn't a conversation, a question, or even a request. It was simply expected of me. A silent burden placed on my shoulders the moment my mother's health began to decline. And so, without protest, without hesitation, I stepped into the role that no one else in the family wanted. I became the caretaker. While my brother, Daniel, lived unburdened, untethered to responsibility, I was the one who carried the weight. He had the luxury of distance, of weekends uninterrupted, of a life that belonged entirely to him. I, on the other hand, had none of those things. I was the one who sat beside her hospital bed through countless nights, listening to the sound of her labored breathing, watching the rise and fall of her chest as I prayed that she'd make it through one more morning. I was the one who administered her medications, learned the ins and outs of her prescriptions when the doctors gave up on explaining, adjusted her pillows when she couldn't find comfort, and coaxed her to eat when her appetite vanished. I was the one who handled her paperwork, juggled the appointments, navigated the labyrinth of insurance claims and medical bills that threatened to drown us both. And I never once complained, because I believed, naively perhaps, that my sacrifices meant something, that she saw me, that despite her silences, despite her tendency to brush off my exhaustion with a simple, "You're strong, you'll manage," she understood the depth of what I gave up for her. I never expected a reward. I never asked for gratitude, but I thought, at the very least, when the end came, I would not be forgotten. I thought she would leave something to me, some acknowledgement, some final proof that she had seen me after all. But I was wrong, because when the will was read, I received nothing. Not a house, not a sum of money, not even a sentimental token. Every single thing she had, every last cent, every asset, every cherished belonging was left to Daniel, the son who had done nothing. I remember the moment with perfect clarity. The lawyer's office was cold, the air stale with the scent of aged paper and coffee that had been brewed too long. I sat across from Daniel, my fingers tightening around the arms of my chair as the words rang in my ears. To my beloved son, Daniel, I leave my estate in its entirety. A pause. A silence so vast it seemed to swallow the entire room. And then the lawyer turned the page. No mention of me. Nothing. As if I had never existed. My breath caught in my throat. I felt the sting of something sharp, a deep, aching wound carving itself into my chest. But I said nothing. I didn't move. I barely even blinked. Daniel, on the other hand, had the audacity to look surprised. His lips parted slightly, his eyebrows lifting as he turned to face me, as if he had just been struck across the face instead of me. As if this wasn't exactly the kind of thing our mother would do. Because, in hindsight, of course she had done this. Of course she had given everything to him. She had always loved him more. I just hadn't realized, until that moment, that she had never loved me at all. The car ride home was a blur. I barely remembered stepping out of the office. Barely recalled the weight of Daniel's gaze as he lingered by his own car, as if debating whether to say something, to offer me some half-hearted sympathy or some pathetic excuse. I didn't wait to find out. I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. By the time I reached my apartment, my body was trembling. But it wasn't grief. It wasn't sadness. It was something else. Something colder. Something dangerous. I sat in the darkness of my living room, the will still echoing in my head, and I felt the first quiet embers of rage begin to burn beneath my skin. I had given everything to her, and she had repaid me with nothing. No, not nothing. She had repaid me with betrayal. And I was going to find out why. The answers did not come easily. The first thing I did was request a copy of the will. The second thing I did was start looking through my mother's financial records, searching for anything that might explain why she had made this decision. And what I found? It made my blood turn to ice. Because the truth wasn't just about favoritism. It wasn't just about my mother loving Daniel more. It was about control. And it was about a secret that had been kept from me my entire life. A secret that changed everything. The first clue came from an old document, one I nearly missed. Buried beneath years of medical bills and insurance statements was a single yellowed paper, a legal agreement signed decades ago, my mother's signature at the bottom. And beside it, Daniel's. I read it once, twice, and with each word, the pieces of the puzzle began to snap into place. The will wasn't just about inheritance. It wasn't just about who she loved more. It was about who owned her. And it wasn't me. It had never been. I sat in the dim glow of my desk lamp, the paper trembling in my hands. My mother had been in debt. A massive, suffocating debt that she had never told me about. One that had been building for years. One that had come from choices I hadn't even known she had made. And Daniel? He had paid it off. But not out of kindness. Not out of love. No. He had made her sign something in return. An agreement. A legally binding promise that when she died, everything would go to him. It had never mattered what I did. It had never mattered that I was the one who cared for her. That I was the one who sacrificed, who suffered, who bled for her. She had already made her choice, years ago, long before she had ever needed me, long before I had ever wasted my life trying to earn a place in her heart. I let out a slow breath. Then carefully I folded the paper, placed it back on the table, and leaned back in my chair. My mind was eerily calm. The rage had settled now. The grief had turned to something sharper. And as I stared at that single damning piece of paper, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I sat there in the dim glow of my desk lamp, the brittle legal document staring back at me like a silent ghost of my mother's choices. My hands, once trembling with the weight of fresh betrayal, had gone still, so still that the air around me felt thick, suffocating. The rage that had burned like wildfire in my veins had cooled into something sharper, something colder, something dangerously clear. Daniel had bought her. Not with love, not with care, not with sacrifice, with money, a transaction, a signature on paper. That was all it had ever taken for her to erase me from her life, not just in death but long before. The truth settled over me in a slow, suffocating wave. Every time she had dismissed my exhaustion, every time she had looked away as I bled for her, every moment she had allowed Daniel to live unburdened while I drowned in responsibility. It had never been oversight. It had never been ignorance. It had been calculated, planned, a choice. And now, as I sat with that truth in my hands, I felt something inside me shift. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was war. I spent the next 2 days in silence, not because I was lost, not because I didn't know what to do, but because I was planning something of my own. For years, my life had been dictated by duty, by expectation, by the quiet, crushing weight of obligation that had never once been rewarded. But now, I had nothing left to lose. I didn't answer Daniel's calls. He had tried to reach out 3 times since the will reading, once in the parking lot, then twice through hesitant, unread messages on my phone. I didn't have to read them to know what they said. I didn't know. Mom never told me. We should talk. Lies. All of it. He had known. If not about the will itself, then at the very least about the role he played. He had spent years living in careless freedom while I wasted away beside our mother's bedside. Now he had everything, and I had been left with nothing. Or so he thought. Because unlike Daniel, I didn't believe in unearned rewards. Unlike our mother, I didn't believe in debts that remained unpaid. And as I sat alone in my apartment, the legal document spread before me, I realized something very, very important. Daniel thought he had won, but he had no idea what I was about to do. The first step was to see the lawyer, not the one who had read the will, not the one who had dutifully gone through the motions of declaring my erasure with legal precision, but someone else, someone better. I found him through a quiet recommendation, someone who specialized in undoing the work of men like the first lawyer. The office was different, warmer, a quiet hum of conversation from the reception area, the soft click of keys on a keyboard as assistants worked behind their desks. But when I stepped into his office, the atmosphere changed. He looked up, his sharp eyes narrowing slightly as he gestured for me to sit. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. Instead, I placed the document in front of him and said the only thing that mattered. Tell me how I can break this. The process wasn't simple. Undoing a legally binding agreement, especially one signed years ago, especially one between a mother and son, was never going to be easy. But difficult didn't mean impossible. There were loopholes, tiny cracks in the foundation of what Daniel had built, weak spots in the armor of his so-called victory. And with every hour I spent combing through old documents, with every call my new lawyer made to financial institutions, with every quiet meeting we had in the evenings when no one else was watching, I began to see the truth unfold. Daniel's deal with our mother hadn't been clean. He had paid off her debts, yes, but he had done it through his name, through his accounts, through his legally traceable transactions. And there was something he hadn't accounted for, something our mother had failed to consider when she'd signed away her loyalty. She had still been in debt, not to Daniel, but to someone else. And when she died, that debt hadn't disappeared. It had transferred. And now it belonged to him. I smiled for the first time in weeks. It wasn't a pleasant smile, it wasn't a kind one, but it was real. Daniel had taken everything from me, but he had also taken her debt, and as I sat there in that office, my fingers trailing over the stack of documents that proved it, I felt something dangerous curl around my heart. I had spent my entire life giving my time, giving my patience, giving my love, my energy, my loyalty. But now I was going to take, and I wasn't going to stop until Daniel felt what it was like to lose. The confrontation wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. There was no screaming match, no broken plates, no fists slammed onto tables. There was only understanding. I arrived at Daniel's new home, our mother's home now legally belonging to him, on a quiet evening, just as the sky was beginning to darken. The air was cool, the wind whispering through the trees as I stepped onto the porch and rang the doorbell. When he answered, he looked tired. I didn't care. He hesitated for only a second before stepping aside, allowing me in. The house was unchanged, still filled with traces of her, still lingering with the scent of old lavender and faded perfume. I ignored it. Instead, I turned to Daniel and placed the stack of papers onto his kitchen table. "You own this house," I said, my voice quiet, calm. He frowned. "What?" "You own this house," I repeated. "You own the accounts, the savings, the assets. Everything Mom left behind." A pause. A slow nod. "Yeah, and you also own her debt." Silence. I watched as his face shifted, as the confusion bled into something colder, something heavier. I tapped the documents. "She didn't pay it all off, Daniel." His fingers twitched. "That's not... It transferred to you the moment she died." His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. I leaned forward slightly, my voice still calm. "So, congratulations, little brother. You didn't just inherit Mom's money. You inherited every unpaid cent she left behind." A breath. A beat. Then I smiled. "And I hope you enjoy drowning in it." The moment the words left my lips, Daniel's face drained of color. His jaw tightened, his fingers twitching at his sides like he was fighting the urge to throw something. At me, at the wall, at the reality he had been too blind to see. I saw it flicker in his eyes, not arrogance, not entitlement, but something far sweeter. Fear. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing as he forced out a single trembling breath. "You're lying." I slid the stack of documents across the kitchen table with the quiet finality of a guillotine blade. "Read it." He didn't move at first. I could see his mind scrambling for another way out, some way to twist this, some angle to justify why none of this should apply to him. But I had done my homework, and the truth was merciless. Slowly, reluctantly, he picked up the papers. His eyes darted across the words, scanning, rereading, his lips parting slightly as comprehension sank in like a slow poison. "This can't be right," he muttered under his breath, flipping to the second page. "This isn't... Mom wouldn't have..." "But she did," I cut in coldly. "She let you inherit everything, Daniel. The house, the savings, the stocks. But debt doesn't just disappear because someone dies." His fingers curled around the edges of the papers, knuckles turning white. He was seeing it now. The mounting unpaid bills, the final notices. The years of quiet loans our mother had taken out, stacking up beneath the weight of her own poor decisions. And now, they all belonged to him. His breath hitched as he flipped to the final page, the grand total staring him in the face like a death sentence. His voice was barely above a whisper. 172,000? Plus interest, I added, watching him flinch. They'll be expecting the first payment in 30 days. And since you were so eager to have everything she left behind, I'm sure you'll handle it just fine. His head snapped up, panic flashing behind his eyes. You set me up, I scoffed. No, Daniel, she set you up. I just let you read the fine print. Silence filled the room. He opened his mouth, then closed it, his face contorting as he tried to process the weight of what he had just inherited. Everything our mother had given him, everything she had stolen from me to hand over so carelessly. It wasn't a gift. It was a curse wrapped in gold paper. And he was the one suffocating under its weight. For days, Daniel tried to find a way out. I ignored every call. The first few messages were defiant, furious accusations, desperate bargaining. You can't just leave me with this. We're family. You have money. Just help me cover it and we'll figure something out. Then the anger shifted into something uglier. You're freaking selfish. You let me believe I had everything just so you could watch me suffer. Mom was right about you. I didn't respond. Not when he called from different numbers. Not when he left voicemails dripping with barely concealed rage. Not even when he showed up at my apartment, banging on the door like a man possessed. I stood behind the wood, arms crossed, heart steady. And when he finally gave up, when his footsteps retreated down the hall, and the apartment fell into silence once more, I knew. Daniel had never been left with nothing before, until now. It didn't take long for our parents to get involved. My father called first, his tone clipped, impatient, as if I were some rebellious teenager refusing to do my chores. Your brother told us what happened. I said nothing. You really left him with that kind of debt? Mom did. A pause, a frustrated sigh. You know damn well he can't handle that kind of financial burden. Neither could I said flatly, but no one seemed to care when it was me. Another silence. Then, in a tone edged with restrained fury, you will fix this. I almost laughed. Fix what? The fact that Mom chose her favorite? The fact that you let her? That money wasn't supposed to be about favorites. Then why didn't I get a cent? Silence again. And in that pause I finally heard it. Finally understood. My father knew. He had always known. He had let it happen. And now, when the weight of that choice was crushing his son instead of me, only now did it become a problem worth fixing. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. I'm not fixing anything, Dad. This is Daniel's mess now. Let him figure it out. His voice turned sharp, warning. If you walk away from this family, then what? I cut in, my voice like ice. You'll pretend I don't exist? Again? His breath caught. I hung up. And just like that, the last thread of obligation I had ever felt to them snapped. Daniel lasted 3 months. 3 months of scrambling, of drowning under a debt he had never prepared to carry. 3 months of trying to sell off assets, of realizing that what our mother left him wasn't enough to cover what she owed. 3 months before the house went into foreclosure, before his credit was destroyed, before his bank accounts bled dry. And then, one desperate evening, he called me. There was no anger, no arrogance, no entitlement, just quiet, hollow resignation. I lost everything. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. Yeah, a beat of silence. How did you survive it? He asked. His voice was tired, small. I thought of the years of struggle, the jobs, the exhaustion, the weight of knowing I had no safety net. I worked. Another pause. I don't know how to do that, he admitted. And I felt something close to pity for him. Not enough to save him, not enough to undo the damage, but enough to understand. For years, he had lived in a world that had never let him fail. He had never been forced to stand on his own. And now, he was exactly where I had been. But the difference? I had learned how to survive. He hadn't. You'll figure it out, I said softly, echoing the very words our mother had once thrown at me. Then I hung up. And this time, I knew. He wouldn't call again. I didn't celebrate. There was no victory parade, no moment of triumphant laughter. Only silence. Only the weight of finality settling over my bones. I had spent years wondering if my mother would ever see me. She never did. But in the end, she had made me. Not into the child she had wanted, but into the person who had finally walked away.